The H.I.S.S of the A.S.P. Understanding the Anomalously Sensitive Person by David Ritchey. This book is about experiences, and it is also about the words used to categorize those experiences. When a specific class of experience is labeled with words that have skeptical, denigrative, or dismissive connotations, words such as occult, paranormal, supernatural, psychical, metaphysical, and New Age, the reality of those experiences is called into question, even in the minds of those who have those experiences. And it is implied that they are unworthy of scientific investigation. In my years as a clinical hypnotherapist, having worked with many clients who reported experiences of such things as extrasensory perception, A.S.P, past life recall, spirit possession, and alien contact, I became convinced that the subjective experiences were very real for the experiencers. This regardless of the reality status of the objective phenomenon. Temporal or spatiotemporal objects of ordinary sensual experience and susceptible to scientific description and explanation. I decided, therefore, that it was appropriate to direct some serious scientific scrutiny toward the nature of such experiences and toward the experiencers themselves. One of my first research goals was to find the right names for things. The value-neutral collective name that I eventually settled on was Stanislav Grof's term transpersonal experiences, TPEs, and I assigned to it the following meaning: experiences that occur beyond the ordinary differentiated boundaries of ego, space, and time. Experiences that suggest the essential interconnectedness and or absolute unity of all that ever was, is, or will be. Experiences that imply the existence of mind as distinct from brain, of spirit, of soul. Moving further into the investigation, I soon discovered that many more terms that were pertinent to a study of transpersonal experiences, so-called altered states of consciousness, dissociation, hallucination, and mind, among them, also had inappropriate value-laden connotations. Introduction. Begin at the beginning and go on till you come to the end, then stop. Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventure in Wonderland. The H.I.S.S of the A.S.P is about the full spectrum of human sensitivities: physiological sensitivities, cognitive sensitivities, emotional sensitivities, altered states of consciousness, A.S.C, sensitivities and transpersonal experience, TPE. That's the broad perspective. From a narrower perspective, this book is about transpersonal experiences, TPEs, and the people who have them. The two perspectives are equally important. If they are treated otherwise, one is likely to fall into the conventional trap of thinking that transpersonal experiences are fictive, that they are not real. This dismissal of the veridicality of transpersonal experiences occurs because most people are unable to perceive the putatively sensory stimuli phenomena that give rise to them, and by consensus such experiences are therefore considered to be not a part of objective reality. Individuals who respond to stimuli that are not a part of consensus reality are said to be hallucinating, and hallucinations are generally held to be evidentiary of mental illness. Typical. The concept of the anomalously sensitive person, A.S.P, is experientially rather than phenomenologically based. It thus avoids the issue of cultural consensus about reality entirely, and sidesteps the issue of psychopathology. The essence of the A.S.P hypothesis is this. Certain individuals who will be spoken of as anomalously sensitive persons, A.S.Ps, in addition to being anomalously sensitive to stimuli in the transpersonal experiences realm, are also anomalously sensitive to stimuli in the physiological, cognitive, emotional, and altered states of consciousness realms. These individuals are predisposed toward being anomalously sensitive by various biological, nature, trauma and abuse, nurture, and temperament type preferences, personality factors. Transpersonal experiences are subjective experiences and, as such, are every bit as real as, say, love experiences, aesthetic experiences, or anger experiences. All experiences, whether the stimuli that engender them are transpersonal or otherwise, are simply the experiencer's interpretation of electrochemical activity in the neurons and synapses of the brain. Neurologically, one experience has the same reality states as another. Many of the A.S.P sensitivities, e.g., immunological, sensory, mnemonic, are objectively measurable, and the data from the H.I.S.S Holistic Inventory of Stimulus Sensitivities questionnaire show that anomalous sensitivity to stimuli in one realm is very likely to be accompanied by anomalous sensitivity to stimuli in all of other realms. The experientially based discussion of transpersonal experiences, TPEs, that comprises the body of the text will, for many, probably raise more questions than it answers. So much the better. My primary objective in undertaking this project was, in addition to opening a few minds, more that of stimulating curiosity that might lead to further research by others. Then it was that of providing definitive explanations. Minds are like parachutes. They only function when they are open. Quote by Sir James Dr. Realizations. It's one thing not to see the forest for the trees, but then to go on to deny the reality of the forest is a more serious matter. Quote by Paul Weiss. Curiosity has its own reason for existence. Quote Albert Einstein. Weird and paranormal were not terms that I used, in that they seemed unnecessarily pejorative. Moreover, I did not apply traditional psychiatric diagnoses to people who had such experience because I felt that those experiences were not well enough understood to be definitely characterized as evidentiary of psychopathology. I agree. Schizophallus everywhere. Those whose stock in trade is psychiatric diagnoses, however, have plenty of support of their use of the label schizotypal personality disorder in such cases. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, in its list of key diagnostic criteria for schizotypal personality disorders includes ideas of reference, unusual perceptual experiences, and odd beliefs that are inconsistent with subcultural norms. Several other criteria need to be met for the diagnosis to be legitimately applied, but a contemporaneous article in the periodical Perceptual and Motor Skills seemed to exemplify the standard way of dealing with such experiences. In much abbreviated form, that article read, Belief in extrasensory perception (E.S.P.) is associated with a bias for right hemisphere processing. This is especially significant when viewed in the light of current theories of hemispheric asymmetries in schizophrenia. Belief in ESP has been recognized as a variable relevant to schizophrenia. Unbelievable. That's so black and white, especially with respect to positive symptomatology, for example, so-called hallucinations, so-called delusions, and so-called thought disorders, and may therefore be construed as a behavioral feature. Again, the behaviorism obsession, characteristic of schizotypy. Yeah, it's really, this is exactly the issue with all these diagnoses. They throw out the baby with the bathwater. So rigidly black and white. Subjects scoring high on scales assessing schizotypy show an increase in leftward lateral eye movements, a loss of the regular right ear advantage in dichotic shadowing, and a sinistral shift in handedness. A pathological overactivation of the right cerebral hemisphere is. It's so, You see, if you are familiar with Ian McGilchrist's Master and His Emissary, where he points out that actually an overactivation of the left hemisphere is quite the problem for our society, because we have lost the connection with the right hemisphere, and here they are pathologizing the right hemisphere activation. So, of course, everything is focused on the left hemisphere, and people think, oh, this is better and we must be all like this. And whoever is different and more right hemisphere activated is pathologized. The neurological basis of positive symptoms in schizophrenic patients. They connect that with overactivation of the right cerebral hemisphere. And this just shouldn't be generalized like this. For example, Jill Bolte Taylor. She had a complete left hemisphere stroke. Her left hemisphere was completely off. And she still functioned with the right hemisphere full activation. So the right hemisphere took over, but she wasn't schizophrenic. She just had a very, very different perception, very sensitive to light, sound, and because the language center is in the left hemisphere, she stopped to understand language, that's Wernicke's area, and she couldn't produce speech, that's Broca's area. But in the end, she recovered. And she talked about this experience. And it is so good that we have her professional way as a neuroanatomist to explain and look at it. So her TED Talk is really something that helped see things in the right perspective. It was a true epiphany. Anyway, the primary questionnaire item used to assess schizotypy reads, do you believe in telepathy? I mean, come on. Schizotypal personality disorder is characterized by belief in clairvoyance, telepathy, or sixth sense. I mean, come on. This is ridiculous. Both pathological schizophrenic and institutionalized parapsychological belief systems share a common neurological basis which compromises a release of right hemisphere function from left hemisphere control. This is so oversimplified. You can't say this like that. Yeah, well, educate yourself on this topic. Read Ian McGilchrist's books, The Master and His Emissary, and The Matter with Things, and read Jill Bolte Taylor's book, in particular my stroke of insight, or watch at least her TED Talk. Anyway, the statement made in the last paragraph seemed to be tantamount to defining schizotypy as belief in ESP. So, okay. In other words, having such unconventional beliefs in and of itself supposedly constituted a mental disorder. It ain't that simple. That argument was allegedly bolstered by the neurologically based theory that belief in ESP results from an overactivation of the right cerebral hemisphere. Perhaps that theory was valid and perhaps it wasn't, but the pathologizing nature, exactly, of the underlying definition of schizotypy seemed inappropriate. Defining and pathologizing a belief in extrasensory perception as a primary symptom of a mental disorder appeared to me to be a way of brushing ESP under the rug and precluding by dismissal any study of ESP that might lead to a better understanding of it. Perhaps the adherents of this approach were not so much trying to understand ESP as they were trying to debunk it. Yep. Liza, her case. These thoughts were very much on my mind when I first met the referred client. Liza, as I shall call her, was a young, attractive, intelligent woman with red hair, blue eyes, and a very fair complexion. When it came to anomalous, a value-neutral term meaning unusual, used instead of the value-laden term paranormal, experiences, Liza had much to relate. She reported one near-death experience, several experiences of apparitions, spirit guides, past life recall, and out-of-body journeying, and innumerable instances of psychokinesis and extrasensory perception (ESP), including psychic dreams, clairvoyance, telepathy, and precognition. She stated, however, that she had no beliefs, one way or the other, about the objective reality of those experiences. Given that beliefs are central to the schizotypal personality disorder diagnosis, it is small wonder that she presented a conundrum to those who were diagnostically oriented. She had the experiences but hadn't invested herself in any beliefs about them. Yeah, they just are what they are. And this is also true. You do not really want to put an additional interpretation that can really never explain this, what you experienced. And this is rather a right hemisphere perception. It is the left hemisphere perception that has to put labels on things, analyze anything, and interpret, and use so many words that you lose the whole context. That's typical. And, well, it doesn't surprise me. She just didn't feel the need to interpret or label these experiences. At times, she felt detached from herself, as if she were an outside observer. And you can have such an experience also if you work with substances or have spontaneous, non ordinary states of consciousness. There is the observer always watching, and you can have all those perspectives at once. So you know you are the person in the body, you are the observer, and the one that creates also. Liza also experienced episodes in which she perceived the external world as strange, distorted, or unreal. Yeah, it makes sense. Because if you look at things from a common sense point of view, from that right hemisphere perception, which sees the whole context, the bird's eye view, you see people acting in such bizarre ways, or this cognitive dissonance. So they seem to be completely unable to see the whole picture. They compartmentalize everything. And that's so typical for extreme left hemisphere perception. So I see that as abnormal. And we should find more of a balanced way of looking at things. Otherwise, we really will destroy the planet. Ian McGilchrist talks about this. Anyway, so Liza, occasionally she spontaneously entered, Stanislav Grof had a problem with this term. He called it extraordinary states of consciousness rather than altered states. Altering is another term for neutering animals. So makes sense that Stanislav Grof changed the term from altered into extraordinary, in which Liza experienced her mind as being absorbed into mystical realms of unity, light, and energy. Interpersonally, she was extremely sensitive. Her relationships tended to be intense and unstable. She frequently experienced feelings of isolation and abandonment. Yeah, because if you don't fit in, if you are not like everybody else, and just see the way people are so far gone into this left hemisphere perception and domesticated into this way of interpreting, judging, and behaving, well, yeah, you feel you are on the wrong planet. Lisa exhibited uncertainty about her self-image. Yeah, I can totally understand that. Her choice of friends and her goals. Yeah, same here. She exhibited a high level of emotionality, experiencing marked mood swings characterized by recurrent depression with occasional episodes of high energy and enthusiasm. Well, possibly she also was eating a lot of carbohydrates and sugar, and they mess up your gut, especially if you have the combination with gluten. Gluten is bad for so many people, and then, yeah, you have physical symptoms and gut issues, and they can also have a big impact on your way of thinking, your brain health. But that does not invalidate her experiences. She often experienced periods of considerable anxiety and worry over which she had no control. It makes sense. If you don't fit in, if you feel you are on the wrong planet and you feel so different from other people or the majority of people, and how things are actually done here. Um, our whole society, this indoctrination, it's not natural the way we are supposed to behave and be. It's an indoctrination, a programming, a domestication. So we need to be really very clear about that. So turn it around. And then obviously it's very understandable that you don't feel that you belong. And you don't trust in the system, obviously, because it doesn't work for you. It doesn't see you. It doesn't hear you. This left hemisphere dominant society, this system wants us all to conform to this dogma, this doctrine. Yeah, so this is not giving you any reassurance for your different way of being, your more right hemisphere dominant perception, the way how you see things and experience things differently. This is always pathologized. So, of course, you feel isolated. Of course, you feel abandoned. And when you cannot trust the system to have your back, then of course you feel anxiety and worry, right? Completely logical. Those are just symptoms. There is always a cause and an effect. And that's a natural reaction to an insane situation, an insane system that is completely unnatural. Liza was subject to a variety of sleep disturbances. That's also just logical. You don't sleep well if you feel anxious and threatened by the system. Yeah, and including insomnia, nightmares, lucid dreams, and myoclonic jerks, sudden involuntary muscle contractions. This can be explained by the nervous system, the sympathetic arousal, fight or flight response, right? If you are so tense, of course, your muscles will jerk and contract. At times, her thinking could become disorganized. She had periods of forgetfulness and inattentiveness. That's also logical. Despite her obvious intelligence, she also had difficulty with reading and with mathematics, both left hemisphere traits. I am also not well versed in mathematics. I really hated as a kid. And again, the system wants people to be only functional in all these different left hemisphere traits, mathematics being one of them. And you cannot go to university or college if you fail in mathematics. It's irrational to do that. So you have a norm of people who succeed and make a career, while artistic people, sensitive people, right hemisphere dominant people, they don't get the same chances in life because of this society and how it is structured. But again, the highly sensitive person is blamed and not the system. Anyway, so back to Lisa. Her speech tended to be digressive and abstract. Yeah, that's also kind of typical. She was inclined to express concepts in unusual ways. Why unusual? Because right hemisphere dominant people have a different way of looking at things. Again, they see the whole picture more than the detail, which is typical left hemisphere perception, seeing the detail and losing the whole picture. Yeah, and then of course you would use words in a novel manner. Very often, right hemisphere dominant people are visual thinkers, so they think in pictures, as for example Temple Grandin has described, and therefore they might not be as verbal or just differently verbal. She had a variety of psychological symptoms that occurred episodically. These included fevers, headaches, flu-like symptoms, pains, and gastrointestinal problems. She also experienced periods of restlessness, tremulousness, and spatial disorientation, which also can be explained through the nervous system activation of sympathetic arousal. So you can have all these symptoms. Unusual bodily sensations were commonplace for her, such things as tingling, numbness, rushes of energy, extremes of heat and cold, pins and needles, and electric currents. Yeah, those are just symptoms. She was unusually sensitive to environmental stimuli, especially lights and sounds. See? She often experienced sensory synesthesia, the spontaneous association of a sensation being activated by external stimuli with another sensation of a different kind. So, for example, you smell sounds or you see colors when you hear something, stuff like that. So the senses just overlap. And she appeared to have an exaggerated startle response. And this is also known in post-traumatic stress injury. If you were traumatized, then things can trigger you, and if you are sensitive to sounds or just expect a threat coming at you from nowhere, of course you would be startled when something unexpected happens, especially sounds. Beyond the personal, traditional psychiatric diagnosis was not my forte. It was not my primary interest, nor was it the reason Liza had been referred to me. My curiosity had been piqued, however. I wanted to understand what type of people had anomalous experiences and why, the context in which those experiences occurred, and the reasons that mental health practitioners routinely pathologized and debunked them, because they are indoctrinated and domesticated into behaving and thinking that way, and only that way. Moreover, as a clinical hypnotherapist, my focus was on the client's experiences rather than on the phenomena purported to underlie those experiences. Therapeutically, it had historically proven efficacious to work with the client's experiences as if they were really real, to appropriately contextualize them rather than to dismiss them as symptoms of a mental disorder. Furthermore, the client's belief or lack thereof in the objective reality of the alleged underlying phenomena appeared to have little bearing on the successful outcome. Stanislav Grof's term transpersonal experiences seemed to be the best choice, as it will be used throughout this book. The term transpersonal experiences, TPEs, means experiences that occur beyond the ordinary differentiated boundaries of ego, space, and time. Experiences that suggest the essential interconnectedness. That's again right hemisphere, perception, see the whole picture, and or absolute unity. and not chopped into bits and pieces that are completely out of context, compartmentalized, and therefore, cannot be interpreted anymore properly. You just have a too small picture. So your solution, so-called solution, will never be appropriate, because if you are left hemisphere dominant and see only a small piece of the whole picture, that's just common sense. It will fail. So therefore, we need people who think differently, see the whole picture. And have those experiences that imply the existence of mind as distinct from brain, of spirit, and of soul. Almost everyone will agree that the mind is somehow associated with the brain. However, when it comes to the question of whether or not the mind can in any way be considered to be separate and distinct from the brain, positions become polarized. Similarly, any attempt to distinguish between mind, spirit, and soul leads to a philosophical quagmire. In order to avoid needless complications, I shall simply postulate that the mind, under the appropriate set of circumstances, can appear to be separate and distinct from the brain. And when it appears to be separate and distinct from the brain, it appears to take on qualities that some people attribute to the spirit or the soul. To put it another way, in any given instance, the more closely the mind appears to be associated with the brain, the more brain-like it appears to be, and the less closely the mind appears to be associated with the brain, the more spirit-like or soul-like it appears to be. In this book, then, the term mind will generally be used to refer to the mind-spirit-soul complex. Developing a taxonomy of transpersonal experiences also proved to be helpful. Some lists of TPEs consists of hundreds of items. Upon analysis, however, it appeared that only 18, those that were most representative and relevant, truly needed to be considered. Logically, they could be organized into three general categories. 1. Experiences of transpersonal perception. 2. Experiences of transpersonal influence. And 3. Experience of transpersonal manifestation of mind. Table 1.1 below shows this categorical breakout and is followed by the definitions of the 18 experiences. Experiences of transpersonal perception, déjà vu, synchronicity, telepathy, precognition, psychic dreaming, clairvoyance. Experiences of transpersonal influence, psychic healing, electrical psychokinesis, psychokinesis. Experiences of transpersonal manifestation of mind, contact with spirit guides, out-of-body experience, past life recall, apparition, mediumistic episode, UFO sighting, near-death experience, spirit possession, alien contact. What this author so far has not done is taking the ego into consideration, and Ian McGilchrist calls the left hemisphere perception and ego interpretation the emissary, and what this author calls the soul, spirit, higher mind perception, Ian McGilchrist calls this right hemisphere master. So for him, it's the master. It's a bit simplified, this model, but it's easy to imagine. So here we have the descriptions of experiences of transpersonal perception, déjà vu, the strong feeling that some person, place, or situation has been experienced before, even though the experience is apparently occurring for the first time. Synchronicity, the famous synchronicity. Maybe that's the most well-known of all. The occurrence of a pattern of significant events, apparently casually unrelated, the connections among which seem to be too meaningful to be mere coincidence. And yeah, the left hemisphere dominant people, they will of course label it coincidence. Telepathy, transmission and or reception of thoughts with another person without normal communication or clues. If you haven't listened to the telepathy tapes, do so. It's a real eye-opener. Precognition, accurate knowledge of an event that will take place in the future and that could not be predicted by logical means. Yeah, this can be emotionally, you just don't want to go there, or you feel, oh, you have forgotten something, and yeah, the feeling of danger. Psychic dream, a dream that matches in detail an event the dreamer did not know about or have reason to expect at the time of the dream. Clairvoyance, including clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, accurate awareness of events that are not available to usual sensory impressions. This ability seems logical once you zoom out of the ego perception of interpreting and have the bird's eye perception, the whole picture, then it only makes sense that you can develop these abilities. Experiences of transpersonal influence. Psychic healing, Healing of an injury or illness through non-physical means such as prayer, medication, laying on of hands, therapeutic touch, etc. Electrical psychokinesis. The influencing of electrical and or electronic equipment causing lights to go on and off, causing malfunctions in watches, calculators, computers, etc., through no natural physical means. Psychokinesis, the causing of changes in the location or state of a physical object, metal bending, fire starting, things falling to the floor. I had that one once. Through no natural physical means. Experiences of transpersonal manifestation of mind. Contact with spirit guides, mental contact with spirits or higher beings, in which the individual receives information or guidance while remaining aware of what is happening. And again, once you zoom out of your ego, the emissary, and you are more right hemisphere dominant, then this seems like something very natural. And people that work with substances like psilocybin, ketamine, MDMA, Amanita muscaria, absolutely, you can experience that. You may just hear spirit guides or animals or even plants, for example, ayahuasca or mushrooms. You can just hear, perceive messages with your inner ear. It's not an outer sound. And I would say that this is not your voice. You just know that's not your brain chatter voice that you usually may hear all the time. And when you zoom out of the ego state, then suddenly there is this pristine silence and inner peace. So the brain chatter shuts down, and obviously only then you may perceive the higher spirits, higher self, whatever you want to call it, spirit guides. So you can hear that different voice giving you a message, or you can even see spirit guides. Some people can exactly describe them. Yeah. And then there is the out of body experience, the sense that one's awareness or mind has moved outside the physical body to a different location, and the body can actually be seen from that location, other than during a near-death experience, covered below. If you are interested in this topic, you can read the books by Robert A. Monroe, or there are also audiobooks. And They are very good. And there are also videos on YouTube, people talking about this. Yeah, there is a lot of information out there. Then there is past life recall, the recollection of details and or emotions of what apparently was another lifetime occurring before the experiencer was born into his current physical body. So I had few of those very vividly. Some of them, others not so much, and there is more of a sensation, or I'm sure that I have been there or lived there, stuff like that. Apparition, a vision while awake of another person, living or dead, who is not physically or objectively present. And this is again explained in the book of Robert Monroe. He describes exactly the room he was in, where he traveled when he was out of body. Then we have mediumistic episode, communication of information or guidance by a spirit using the voice, trance channeling, or hand automatic writing of the experiencer, who is in an altered state, non-ordinary state of consciousness, and has little awareness afterwards of what was communicated. So here there are many charlatans that pretend, that claim they channel, and you have to be very careful. But usually you just see it because it's so ridiculous. Some channelers, they are just so ridiculous. Anyway, UFO sighting. The observation of an unidentified flying object, UFO, flying saucer, and or its occupants without actual contact taking place. Near-death experience, coming very close to death, actually dying according to clinical criteria, and experiencing such classical NDE events as leaving the body, journeying through a tunnel, entering a world of light, perceiving a presence, etc., but ultimately surviving. These are also quite known. And many books were written about it. And for example, people who were on the operating table and under anesthesia, they suddenly could see themselves from above, and some could even exactly say what the surgeons were communicating among themselves. Spirit possession, the feeling that another mind, demon, spirit, soul of someone living or dead is attempting to take or has taken over control of the experiencer's body and will. Alien contact, actual contact with what are often called extraterrestrial beings, sometimes involving being taken board a UFO, frequently against the experiencer's will. Debunkers. The discovery of the truth is prevented more effectively not by the false appearance of things present, which mislead into error, not directly by weakness of the reasoning powers, but by Preconceived Opinion by Prejudice, Arthur Schopenhauer. An openly transgressed custom brings sure punishment. Mark Twain. The difference between a skeptic and a debunker is significant. A genuine skeptic takes the position, as a good scientist should, that true knowledge or knowledge in a particular area is uncertain. A debunker, on the other hand, has an a priori commitment to invalidating the subject at hand. When it comes to transpersonal experiences, TPEs, it appears that the debunkers are committed to excluding the study of all of them from the mainstream of modern science. Theirs is definitely not a position of objective scientific neutrality, but rather seems to be driven by deep-seated, perhaps unconscious emotion. And all indications are that the operative emotion is fear. Motivations for debunking. Transpersonal experiences are unusual, and in the realm of human emotion, unusual, different, abnormal, and weird all have similar connotations. Differences establish otherness, and where there is other, there is fear. Ancient Indian Upanishads. Otherness can be and generally is established on much more prosaic grounds than those of TPEs. There seems to be an evolutionary basis for this. At the old brain limbic system level of awareness, otherness implies danger, predators, and such. In the distant past, those who didn't respond to otherness with fear and loathing didn't survive. Their genes weren't passed on to succeeding generations. Otherness engenders fear, and fear triggers the fight or flight response. When that other appears to be at a disadvantage, the fight response dominates, and that other is aggressed against. In a civilized society, such aggression is most likely to take the form of ostracism. Even if all issues of religion and psychopathology are set aside, there is still a natural tendency for people in a large group to separate into tribes, to divide themselves into us and them. Left hemisphere perception. Children quickly discover the security that is inherent in being part of a majority, the us, as opposed to being part of a minority us, otherwise known as them. That's a powerful motivation to look for distinguishing characteristics that make an other a majority, to use those characteristics to concretize that otherness and then to vilify that otherness. Left-handedness serves this purpose well because it is so obvious. Other obvious characteristics, all of which are associated with non-right-handedness, NRH, include epilepsy, Tourette's disorder, cleft palate, hair lip, and clumsiness. Not so obvious differences that are also associated with non-right-handedness include such things as learning disorders, speech impediments, and intellectual or creative giftedness. So the artist people, they are often isolated and excluded because they are a bit different. It starts already there. Once otherness has been established, children unfortunately prove to be very effective and very mean at locking it in with potent labels such as geek, dweeb, nerd, gay, spas, and space shot. Yeah. And then you have bullying. And that can get very out of hand and be a trauma for life for the one that experienced the bullying. So this was the introduction, chapter 1 and 2 of the H.I.S.S of the A.S.P, Understanding the Anomalously Sensitive Person by David Ritchey. To be continued.